Hi everyone. My name is Hengzhi. I am a student from Harvard, and I'm the editor-in-chief of House Magazine. Thanks everyone for being here. It's really, really emotional for me to see everything that we have done and this project really coming true. Like low-key want to cry. This is something that me and a group of friends have been envisioning for a long time, and finally it's materializing. We all know that every day there are people who want to start magazines, but it's very hard to actually get it done. The name of the magazine really started as a joke, a riff off really the idea of the house magazine, which is a term for a predominant or sort of like institutional magazine for an exclusive group of people. You might say Vogue is a house magazine for the fashion industry, or Wired is the house magazine for the Silicon Valley. We don't want that. We want a literary magazine that is not pretentious. We want a literary magazine that is inclusive, and I'll address that actually in the editor's note that there's actually no reason for a magazine to really use so much negativity to define itself today, because the amount of readership of literature among the younger people are already so much declining. And there's really a second, more personal reason for that name. I am actually someone who I didn't grow up in this country. I grew up in Beijing. I grew up in China. I went to high school in Philadelphia. And for a long period of time, I had this situation where when I was writing in Chinese, I feel repressed. When I'm writing in English, I feel inadequate. And that kind of translated into the social and sort of just like self-esteem. So I really, in early years of my high school, I spent a lot of time in literature. That's how I got into literary theory and kind of social theory. And literature became a second home for me. Literature became like sort of that place where I always come back to. That is not physical or not geographical, but that's always there for me spiritually. So House is also an idea of like, building a community, building a really a little utopia on Earth with all of you guys, and this is my second home. So that's the second meaning of the magazine. Right now, we're gonna keep the readings short because there's a lot of people, and we have a lot of wine, a lot of champagne, a lot of cheese boards, very beautiful. So today will be mostly hangout, but I do want to give everyone a little teaser of the sort of essays, stories, poetry, reviews we have in this issue. So I'm going to start off, I'm not going to have anyone read full essays, but I'm going to start off reading two passages from the editor's note, and I will have kind of essay writers read passages, or poets just read single poems or second, or two poems, just to keep it short. The two passages I'm going to read, the first one is, more critical, just kind of analyzing what's going on in the literary world. And the second one is more manifesto, of course, as we all love a good manifesto. The editor's note is titled, "What is Cultural Criticism Today on Culture, Care, and Sensibility?" The slogan we came up for this magazine is the new cultural criticism magazine that cares. I think care and caring and being able to be sensible to other people and to each other is the thing that we see in criticism. And this is the thing, this is a sort of type of writing that we want to do. To start a new cultural criticism magazine today means first to admit failure. This is beyond the simple truth that to begin anything is to pronounce the death of something else. Often is an old self, a predecessor, a status quo disguised as some terminus. Realistically speaking, the genre of cultural criticism has just not been very triumphant in the past 2 decades. We're forced into a grassrootedness. There's no institution, no establishment, no idol. Who even is the audience for a new magazine? Who's going to hear The Falconer? Some of the most respectable literary quarterlies or biennials can barely hold on to their few thousand subscribers. It is not a surprise when sometimes the amount of submissions even surpasses the total readership. A certain very popular literary criticism journal for poetry, for has a print size of just above 20K and publishes around 300 poems annually from approximately 100K from approximately 100K submissions. While more and more young people read only within their academic requirements, enrollments in college language and literature classes continue to drop. In these classrooms that are already out of favor, contemporary publications are often not incorporated in the syllabus. Because in these times of undersupply, the English department see their duty more to preserve and not to productize. Around 2004, the year when I was born, there was a short-lived boom of the so-called little magazines. These are socially concerned independent publications perceived with the aura of the avant-garde. Many of these magazines, N+1 and Garnica, quickly stood out and became extremely popular with a specific demographic, to a specific demographic for breaking the stagnant convention of established publications rank in Quincy institutional hierarchies. When N+1 started, the New Republic was a gatekeeper, whom they called a major league culture magazine supporting a farm team political bureau. As a chief writer, James Wood, who might as well be the Shohei Ohtani of this matter, was seen as the establishment's designated penman. His view, they say, were too easy, too self-contained. His writing were always a hit piece. His style almost too prominent that invoked anxiety of influence. Yet honestly, who still reads the New Republic today? Even most of the humanity majors in college can name 3 critics or 2 column writers they follow. There is no circulation. Poets are read only by other poets. What is the partisan review again? Who are the New York intellectuals? It feels funny nowadays calling any piece of media in text a hit piece. This model of creating a contrarian identity for a magazine by asserting its difference and negativity against its own self-identified fathers. We watched this recently done by The Drift. In their editor's note for the debut issue back in 2020 is losing its validity. Attacking a straw-man, or more likely now, an already exclusive bunch of loosely connected magazines all based in New York, charging them with 100 synonyms of petit bourgeoisies, simply doesn't do anything anymore. Accusing others of navel-gazing becomes in itself the highest form of navel-gazing. With the status quo being over, there's somehow still so much bureaucracy and pretentious in the organizations. How absurd. The industry itself remains boring, detached, corporate, nonsensical, in a field that has been pronounced a sentence of death countless times on national news, where the death of and the end of have become parts of the house style for commenting on any happenings with the literary world. We still experience so much force and friction, mostly from within. From the dictators that'll decide who get tenured and who gets a job, in the tectony of industry that decides one to become a poet or a novelist or memoirist from the FFAs, or a postdoc or professor from the universities, or editor or critic, through magazine beginning level internships that pays the lucky ones the very lucky few 70K a year in New York. We are truly a bunch of raw materials. Whereas the masters of perpetuation tell you that its cost is liberal and its cost is radical. It leads you to a better world beyond in the total, they say. And in fact, it is a place not so dissimilar to Labatte's voluntary servitude. Culture has become a secondary issue. We want to restate culture as one of the first priorities. We believe that the spirit of suspicion and self-reflection across so many of the intellectual movements in the 20th century, that anything truly transformative starts from the transformation of the collective mind or consciousness. The question to ask really is, why did literary criticism have or seem to have had so much power in the mid to late 20th century? How about the studies of humanities in general? I'll leave this question to the readers. I will not try to diminish the power of this question by attempting to give it an answer. We believe that everyone is a critic. The right to engage in criticism is a manifestation of one's agency and humanity. Reading and literary analysis, including when applied to film and music, as well as we'll see done in this issue, is the way one accesses and learns from the constant movement of culture. Happening concurrently with the breaking down of the old order of how criticism is to be done is a great democratization of the act. It is time to restate the importance of a long tradition of a sort of asceticism that comes with being a critic, and get rid of the jargon and references and see what it is really as hard. That is a capacity to care for each other, for friends, for strangers, in the deepest way possible. The faculty I'm describing is a radical sincerity facing the world and the self, a kind of attention and receptivity of the real, which is simply sensibility. A common human desire to know and to know the way other people become visible to us or cease to become visible to us, for example, in the words of the writer Alan Scarry, or consider the standard that Heron James views as ideal for a piece of art, the present, palpable, intimate, which the critic James Wood quotes as his own personal North Star. Reading literature, or broadly speaking, engaging in our culture, offers not only pleasure, but also a means of grounding our ideas and abstractions, often dangerous ones, on real experiences and persons through caring with a certain intimacy with the world. Ours, I quote, is a culture based on excess, on overproduction. The result is a steady loss of sharpness in our sensory experience. Susan Sontag's prophecy from the 1960s seemed truer than ever today. What is important now is to recover our senses. We must learn to see more, to hear more, to feel more. Our task is to cut back content so that we can see the thing at all. What we need is to recover our senses. What we need to criticism is a revival of care. The critic's job today is to notice and to care, to ask questions and dig into the lives we have been living. What did I miss out on? What did I continue living in my life, bypassing, lying to myself as if it never happened? What did I follow and think it must be so and there's no alternative, while caught in between the flocks of false agencies and exceptions? What did I accept as the answer, the norm, and the truth without reviewing? This is why we at House Magazine believe in reviving a longer format of critical writing among the youth. The type of writing we see being favored in the ecosystem lean more and more toward shorter and easily consumable content, such as short journalistic reports and op-eds. These flattened news pieces have long been attacked for their hidden biases, or their limited lens and style make it impossible for them to address the places they come from. These ties of opinions create endless discussions and quarrels, but never elucidation, where a debate is reduced to a change of or economy of talk points, and the game becomes just fabricating certain rhetoric to restate these pre-existing talk points, and the conversation sinks into what James Baldwin brilliantly termed a labyrinth of attitudes and doesn't go anywhere. We don't preempt oppositions. We don't stage overly simplified positionalities of the left or the right. For an essay in this magazine, we want you to draw out a full form of consciousness of your thinking by showing the genealogy or historicity of where that way of thinking comes from and how your way of thinking is different from the past. This practice will also enable genuine entries to engage with your writing. An essay is not merely the manifestation of an a priori take or belief. We want to give the full depth of the idea by contextualizing it and disentangling it with the truth about how the idea developed in the world and within you. The essays in this debut issue, are our first attempts, our first tryings and testings and weighings, really, indicating the French root of essayer, of that usage, at this philosophy. To read these essays, to care about the whole persons behind the flow of their arguments, and to know their tastes, their preferences, and their minds. To read the poems and stories in this issue is to notice the echoes that they make on the soundscapes of the literary forerunners that they follow after, along the social realities and the local scenes they draw inspirations from. In this sense, we practice criticism as community building. We see criticism as a way of living, a proposal to refuse to live the unexamined life, and we invite you to take on that proposal with us. Thank you for being here, and let's hear some poems and essays and stories. Where's Madeleine?
Madeline's outside, and also Kyra.
Yeah. You can introduce your article.
Okay. Okay. Hi.
Well, my friends are outside, so I want to stand on the steps and adjust
Yeah,
the street.
let's do that.
Hi guys. Hi Yomu. Hi Albert and Tyler. Hi Emma. Hi everybody. Hi Tyler. Hi everybody. How's it going? My name is Madeleine. I'm a doctoral student in religion. Thanks so much, Bill, for having me. I don't see is hi Ellie. Ellie, Bill, thank you so much for including me in the magazine. And Ellie, thank you so much for putting so much work into my piece. The essay that I wrote for this debut issue is on Simone Weil, the 20th century. Thank you so much. Oh, thank you. That's really nice of you. It's on the 20th century French intellectual Simone Weil. She lived in the kind of first half of the 20th century and died very young in the midst of the Second World War when she was only 34 years old. So my essay in this magazine is something that I've been obsessed with for quite a long time. Almost immediately after Weil's publication, she was treated as, by a lot of her readers, by a lot of those who received her, a medieval Christian mystic. Interesting. But actually, that wasn't just a coincidence. It wasn't just something that sort of randomly happened or something that people noticed. It was, as other scholars like Anna Kellner have noted, the deliberate result of a really particular publication process. And so what I'm trying to do in this essay is to show how not only is what happened with Weil sort of the result of this publication process, but also how what happens with Weil's writing is the exact same thing which happens to a lot of medieval Christian mystical writers, which is women write these incredibly dense and strange and interesting books about God and how God is completely unknowable. And then people read their biographies and they just sort of input the biography into the text that these women have written, and they can only sort of read and interpret these musings and these thinkings on the absolutely unknowable God as, oh, this woman is just writing about her life. She's just writing about herself. So I'm like, this is not like a very party thing to read. It's not very sexy, but I hope you guys enjoy, and maybe you'll like it when you pick up the actual magazine. Let's see if I can find it in here. This is the first time that I'm picking it up, so maybe Bill can show me.
It's right here.
Thank
Right
you.
here, yeah.
Wow, there it is on page 31. Okay, so I'll just read the beginning and then I'll read the part that's like not just me talking about theology, because again, you're like all standing in a warm room, like nobody wants to hear me talk about theology. Okay. Thank you so much. I mean, I think so too, but like we have to take a while to get to that point. Within a decade of Simone Weil's death, the titles saint and mystic were already trailing behind nearly every mention of the French writer, teacher, and activist. Was she a saint? Asks a 1951 piece in Time magazine. One of the first studies on Weil by the medievalist Marie Madeleine de Vie displays its stance in the title, The Mysticism of Simone Weil from 1951. The following year, T.S. Eliot, beloved by everyone in this room and on the street, praised Weil as a, quote, kind of genius akin to that of the saints, excuse me. The halo affixed to her name is always, however, just off center. Most accounts of her life confirm that Weil, notably born into a Jewish family, never entirely converted to Christianity. She remained until death on the, quote, threshold of the church, as she wrote, hence the label given to her by Andre Gide, patron saint of outsiders. Like every article you read about her uses that immediately. This characterization of Weil as basically Christian saint and mystic is the deliberate result of a very particular publication process. As literary scholar Anna Kellner argues, Weil was posthumously molded by her editors in the image of a medieval Christian mystic. And just as with these medieval figures, popular writing and scholarship on Weil frequently focuses on her biography and on her body specifically at the expense of her philosophical and theological work. The corporeal metaphors of her work are often assumed to refer to her physical body, an error made even by such incisive thinkers as Anne Carson and Chris Kraus. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. That's okay. This too is a connection between Weil and medieval holy women. The corporeal metaphors of the 13th century Flemish writer Beatrice of Nazareth were similarly literalized, resulting in a hagiography that disregards her theological work in favor of extensive descriptions of her body. There is no new thing under the sun, laments Ecclesiastes 1:9. Such bodily readings of Weil do more than diminish her vast and creative intellectual output. They also create the conditions by which Weil's philosophy is now introduced to new readers as a how-to for hunger. Should I keep going? Should I read more?
I think that's great. The theological part is amazing. I think people really want to hear about the social and the political.
Keep going. Okay.
Yeah.
I'll read the personal part, because you can't just write about theology. You have to write about yourself. But also writing about theology is always writing about yourself. Okay, so this is on page 38. It looks really beautiful. Again, good job, everyone. I'm very happy to be included. So skipping ahead to 38. In this essay against biographical readings, I will now tell you something autobiographical. Because I have a history of restricting and binging, compulsive exercising, food obsession, my serpent in the garden, my demons in the desert, my numbingly dull loser situationship, every day, my phone insists on showing me the best and brightest in 15-second clips covering the hottest new ways to agonize over calories in, calories out. No matter how many times I click I'm not interested, the social media platform, formerly known as Twitter, is convinced that I must be kept up to date with ED-Twit, the corner of the internet where users anxiously log their step counts and weigh-ins, post flash photos of their carefully constructed safe meals. ED-Twit is different from the wellness and fitness content that dominates all social platforms and much of legacy media, only in that it does not lie about what it promotes, disordered eating. On an afternoon this past July, scrolling and eating, I succumbed to the clickbait of a suggested thread. Quote, stop looking at it as discipline and start looking at it as devotion. It promised to contain the secrets to a quote mindset shift that would help me achieve my goals. Illustrated with Pinterest photos of yogurt bowls and desks artfully strewn with books and papers, vague and platitudinous advice posting like this is almost always a dog whistle. When they say goals, they obviously mean weight loss. I'm in my late 20s and I fall for it every time. Honor your goals. Fall in love with failure, read the tweets, the secret isms entirely familiar, and then a shock. Esoteric girlies, wrote the poster. Learn about attention and prayer in Simone Weil's writing and apply this to your self-devotion. Care for yourself so you can do the same for others. For years, I'd seen Wei moodboarded and quoted by users floating about in the Red Scare listener extended universe, which significantly overlaps with ED-Twit if I were a tacky YouTube video essayist. God, I'm reading a joke out loud is embarrassing. If I were a tacky YouTube video essayist, I might even call it a pipeline. But this was different. The poster's profile was the expected stream of daily logs, the crawl spaces of the restricted eater I so well know to be self-soothing, meager meals, exercise, readings from the philosophy and religion shelf of the chain bookstore. But they pointed to Wei as the motivation for all of this, interpreting her argument for academic study as the highest preparation for prayer and thereby for love of nature. This is in her essay, Reflections on the Right Use of School Studies, included in the collection Waiting for God, as applicable to weight loss. So I hope you enjoy reading this. I don't think weight loss is unserious. I think it's really serious. And I hope I've tried to sort of emphasize that in the piece. Thank you so much again for being here. And it's nice to see many friends.
Thanks so much, Madeleine.
Madeleine, that was so great. Thank you for starting it off.
Can I stand where you're standing?
Yeah, please. Thank you, House for having me. It's so great to be here. Also, thank you, Grolier, for having us. It is amazing to be packed in here, standing room only. This is a new experience for me in the Grolier. So good job, everybody. The poem that I'm going to read is a little bit long, but it's only one poem. And it's called Okay, Angel. Okay, Angel, why don't you try it? Foot on the gas like so, but faster. This ATV isn't above a backslide. What's June if the beaver won't find the culvert where he hears it? He always does. Up by the head gate, you can squelch over and test the mud-winched arms of his dam, his main house, that is, and every mid-morning we disarrange his side projects. He throttles the ditch with fresh aspen. Points of green shimmy out the pipe mouth, and he works them again at night. Thick veins snake Jean's hand that turns the soil where he follows. The day burns, and Andrew and I tail him, Jean and the beaver both. We spread our hip waders in the full silt, the weeds that spine from the prized ditch bottom and out of the ruts alongside it. May made the bodies flower, but not in Laramie. On Sheep Mountain, the golden current heaves out pinprick blossoms only now, and only with the bugs, frenzied, mating. They tell us that's what this orgy is for. Sweet air for sweet blood. You get the wind, or you get the skeeters. Jean breaks the four-wheeler and climbs out. Picks one white mountain lily, once his father's favorite. Now Jean and the machine both creaking, full denim on this man, recently 75, cut off sleeves and plenty dirt at the seat and at the knees. You get water when you get that beaver. And sure, some dirty talk too. Emma, oblige me. Green crowds the stream, the pond, the slow spread meadow. Jean paces through these now, and you know who else behind. Two creatures reckoning the length of their territory and then some. You see anyone while we're up here, you let me do the talking. All right, it's a lot like a movie. I see it. I shoot the 22, then the shotgun. It kicks a few straight hickeys to my right shoulder, and there go the clay pigeons, which are a safety vest color. No pigeon would be caught dead in, and which we leave out there beyond the fence line, where Jean lobbed them, lacrosse style. Don't tell him that's how I said it. The shattered ones and the whole, this is emotionally coded game, and we are not to talk about that. Down here, we're past the seat of this morning's ditch run. We stomped down the mountain ahead of it, my waders having leaked back at the headgate, and now my feet damp, also too warm, wiping around shallow in their rubber sacks. We turn, watch the bunching flow fold narrow over the elk prints. Confide in me now, and you'd better get the narrative. Learn how to own it up at the dinner table. Lonetta and the Great Flood. Jean folds characters like Deadeye, Bullwhacker, and Skinny. People, listen, Lonetta, owner of Crystal Dolphins Novelties in Coffeyville, Kansas, and owner of Crystal Dolphins Bait and Tackle in Coffeyville, Kansas. Let's add Blue Queen of the Vapor Cave. Add the German in Thermopolis with the only tweed snap brim for miles, side-eyeing either me or Sam in the lobster pot, and again at the semi-broken suitmate swimsuit dryer. Let's add Al, who sits grinning now at this scrubbed and regreased table, broad shoulders cranked high, green t-shirt draped off those two bone knobs so straight you almost don't see his chest between. The shoulders themselves a little crooked, one with its year prior operation growing still. And this delay is not one, but two ceramic on polyethylene hips. And Jean, his brother, needs a third, cobalt, chromium, titanium, nothing hurts. Al's hat stays on. When I talk, his mustache slides wide over his teeth, tilts his head in. His eyes ask, say it again, without making me say. This table knows I can't hear you, but you don't know this yet, Emma. Sure, little Sage might have called you intruder when you levered up past the new dog and onto the porch, but I hugged you on introduction in the dirt front yard. Sage also dirt-faced and grinning like her grandpa. She's at your elbow now, stabbing 3 kernels of sweet corn each bite. She wriggles to make sure you check on her. Look, what's the difference between what you see and what you say? You'll say it now. See it again later. I'll watch you figure it. What I asked. How I asked it. My life here spread around me. Blair, Laney, Sage, Jaylene, the burned post of the porch I dug out to show you alone, the fire that close. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. Oh, that's good. That's
All right, hello, my name is Max. Thank you all for coming out. My essay is on page 42 and 43, and then goes on from there. The idea for this essay actually came sometime during the pandemic. I was looking at what a lot of Americans were describing as racial resentment, or racial rage or anger. And I thought that wasn't exactly the right word for it exactly. That what we were feeling wasn't really anger, and that in the few cases where it was anger or it was rage, they were expressed. But there was a kind of unexpressed racial emotion that had become the dominant one in the United States. And it was one that populated spaces that were less material than the streets or sort of coffee shops. Here, I'm going to read to you the beginning of this and then a small passage in the middle. I've called it Parable of the Fishes. It's about Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, but also about racial contempt. I begin with a quote from Schopenhauer. Genuine contempt is the unsullied conviction of the worthlessness of another. Contempt is a perfect feeling. Rage and violence are imperfect because they are volatile. They demand an action or a response or some other act commensurate with their intensity. Contempt, on the other hand, is perfectly stable. It sees through someone to a deeper motive or neurosis of which they themselves are often unaware. The subject of contempt becomes an object or character over whom the contemptuous can claim a psychoanalytic upper hand. Contempt, in this sense, is akin to a kind of close reading. Actions and reactions reveal something that the other is trying to obscure. Contempt, like reading, assigns to these actions a coherent logic that is only as comforting as it is reductive. The familiar terms for describing racial tension in the United States are hatred and resentment. Popular use of racial hatred predates that of racial resentment by almost a century. The latter emerged as a term in the late 80s, but remained peripheral until the 2007 election cycle. Its usage tripled during Obama's first 2 terms in office, and took a 6-fold leap during Trump's first term, overtaking racial hatred in 2019. Racial contempt, on the other hand, has remained a fringe term, a barely noticeable slope at the bottom of Ngram. Contempt is not about threat or ugliness or even ignorance. Schopenhauer writes that contempt is the unsullied conviction of the worthlessness of another. A conviction of the worthlessness of another is nothing new. Both hatred and resentment have worthlessness at their center. But the key here is unsullied. Contempt casts judgment without dirtying the contemptuous with the disgrace of others. Morrison sets the bluest eye in Lorain, Ohio, a town on the south shore of Lake Erie, now on the outskirts of Cleveland. The key characters are Claudia McTeer and Peccola Breedlove, a pair of Black girls growing up in the early 40s. Claudia narrates much of the novel, recalling the life of Peccola, a foster child living with the McTeers. Fragmentary vignettes of their lives refigure the violence-marred past that precipitates Peccola's ultimate descent. Her mother, Pauline Breedlove, works for the Fishers, a middle-class white family, as domestic help. She cooks and cleans and bathes the Fishers' children. One day, the genteel and proper Mrs. Fisher asks Pauline why she doesn't leave her alcoholic and abusive husband, Charlie. The conflict that ensues is unlike others in the novel. 2 women, one black, the other white, one middle class, the other poor, stumble upon a distinctly modern feeling, contempt. Then I'll skip a chunk and I'll read from just close to the end, page 47. American racial politics have moved over the past century from rage to resentment and from resentment to contempt. The former transition is a product of genteel white victimhood at the hands of housing reform, affirmative action, civil rights, and demographic shift. The latter is the result of a suffocating and pessimistic irony. Today, our disagreements are more distant, conducted in an X thread or in a comment section, using a cryptic vocabulary only comprehensible to our allies. Our fights are more funny than they are intense. At the end of Barack Obama's second term in office, since the end of Barack Obama's second term in office, there's not been a presidential candidate that both parties have taken seriously. We belittle those whom we disagree with by creating endless memes and short clips and inside jokes, not because we fear them, but because we see through them, or at least we think we do. These feelings can hardly be called disagreement. They are 2 sides talking past the illegible alterity of the other, and contempt is, after all, the only way that both parties can enjoy winning.
Thanks so much, Max.
Hello, I'm Dylan, and I have 3 poems in the issue. They're all pretty short, so I can read 2 of them. The first one is based off of a passage from Virginia Woolf's The Room of One's Own. It's referencing mostly the relation and kind of between Cleopatra and Octavia in classic literature and how it's often kind of flattened and just like reduced by many writers and critics of the time. And in the essay, she refers to them by their initials. So that's what I'm doing here. That might be really confusing out loud and not on a page. So C and O are like names. Yeah. So it's called It Is All Half-Lights. The androgynous mind sleeps. It is halting and halting, faulting and faulted. C fears she might never know if she likes O, ever rageful, stamping out calm like a boot over mellow ashes, while lamplight pulls sick and yellow over someone else's lawn, and C feels her throat, purple, clotted. When C steps on the grass, nobody congratulates her, not even O for all her novelty, and sometimes when C stands on tiptoe in that hall of mirrors, she really can see her final figure, the final girl where the reflections cease. That final girl is O, of course. C fears her face will never be her own. Instead, every feature she has ever hated, every feature she has ever loved. It is too dark in the sky, and the vein is embedded in too much skin, and the bird's throat too thick. And then I'll also read the first one. It's called Before Memorial Day. Pinstripes and bitter shellfish, early spring with the kneeling night, and you do not yet know. If only I could darn socks, weave some cloth, be more tactile with textiles, lap up the cobalt night and find it refreshing. In 1 month, I will be sore, no longer bleeding, stitched up to my final form, and you do not yet know how the trees will green, how there will be a pencil yellow bus somewhere, packed with kids kneeling over gray pleather seats creased like old palms, weaving keychains out of plastic gimp, crying when their mothers pour hydrogen peroxide over scraped red skin. How a single squirrel lies dead on the green air road outside the woods, soft belly to the sky, pelt pale like soft cheese. I prepare for so much pain. I pair my breaths to my pulse. Try to drown myself in warm static, shelled music, but I find I'm all clear-eyed and cut greens.
That's so much fun.
Can people hear me or does this go up? Um, sorry. As people have said, wow, this is so many people. Oh, in many ways, I'm very glad if you're Hengzhi or Lucas, you have heard me talk about sex in the cinema many times and in many ways.
And debated.
And debated. And in many ways, I feel quite grateful that I now have a captive audience here. Yeah, this is a wonderful, like I was texted about this 2 months ago and asked if I wanted to write something.
Emerson's from Brown, by the way.
I don't go to Harvard. Yeah, I'm sort of a clumsy interloper, cover blown. But yeah, this is kind of thinking about the sex scene, thinking about sex in general and how that exists in our culture has been a really prominent thing in my life since basically my sophomore year of high school. And the opportunity just to like write about it for literally anyone was like an amazing honor. So yeah, I'll read sections of it. Again, I don't know how much people care about it, but I care, and that's what counts.
And we care.
And we care. Maybe. Well, we'll see. But yeah, this is my essay on how the box office killed the sex scene. So, while in the past year, sex has slowly crawled its way back into the movies, starting with movies like Saltburn and Challengers, and more recently, films such as Baby Girl, Queer, and Anora. Cinema has not become more sexy, rather, they are becoming more sexual. All three of these films focus on sex in their own way. Baby Girl is about an inverted psychosexual relationship between a boss and her much younger male employee. Queer is an adaptation of the William Burroughs novel centered around queer love and desperation, while Lenora is a stripper's unlikely rise and fall to wealth through a serendipitous meeting with a Russian billionaire's son. None of these are bad films, and the presence of sex in them is not necessarily bad news. Rather, it seems like an inevitable respite from the almost decades-long reign of sexless PG-13 films. It is worth noting, however, that despite the inevitable shift back towards sex, it came quite quickly. In 2020, one interview, Paul Verhoeven, a controversial director of sex-based movies such as Basic Instinct and Showgirls, remarked, quote, "There is already, for 20 years, certainly a movement towards Puritanism, and the question that is asked is why would you show a sex scene?" When the puritanical culture that Verhoeven is describing was still at large, that is to say, when sex scenes were disappearing, many of its opponents would make the comparison to pornography. The logic of this argument relied on the belief that pornography was gratuitous, fundamentally shameful, and did not have a place in the mainstream. While pornography, thank you. While pornography is far from a perfect genre, critics of the sex scene did not account for the fact that a nude body or even a sex scene does not equate to porn. There are finer lines between what contains sex and what is fundamentally erotic. Read sexy. Smut contains sex, poetry is erotic. Snapchat nudes contain sex, charcoal nude drawings are erotic. Red LED lights contain sex, candles are erotic. When the sex scene initially started disappearing, it seemed as if they were being subsumed in the name of popular culture. PG-13 franchise films became the norm because it was simply good business. PG-13 serves as a middle ground, able to market to both a kid and adult audience. Studios know that franchise films are the most profitable and they design them backwards for the broadest possible audience. The shift back to sex in movies, while ultimately placing sex in a more visible place, has done little to change attitudes. Sex within Gen Z is down, the age of virginity has risen, and the number of couples has decreased. This leads to a theory about the permanence of the PG-13 era. Given the relative rarity of sex and nudity in films the past decade, studios have trained audiences to see those things as inherently pornographic, and in response to this, sex in movies has come back as pure absurdity. The three aforementioned films, Baby Girl, Queer, and Honora, despite the presence of a sex scene, are all united by the fundamental unsexiness of the display. Whether it is the shifted and extreme power dynamics of Baby Girl, the pining in Queer, or the skewing of sex in Honora, sex is never just sex. It is desperation, it is metaphor, it is story, it is moral. The puritanical culture is still at large, just with a more tolerant system to present imagery. There's no capital S sex, there's just guilt around it. We still cannot stomach sex, so we wreck it into something unrecognizable in the name of quote unquote art, or we suppress the impulse entirely. You could see this then as the sex scene eclipsing pornography's long-held grip on sexual aesthetics. Porn is formed entirely on the basis of spectacle, replacing the real, the body, with a vacant sign, image of the body, in an attempt to recreate sexual pleasure, orgasm. Porn's aesthetics have always been superficial at best. Even the most devout addict implicitly understands that porn is a surrealist interpretation of sex. The lack of eroticism is made up for in the increasingly hardcore situations and exaggerated visual and audio stimuli. The contemporary sex scene, on the contrary, is stripped down in nature. They're often quiet and bizarre. Barry Keoghan eating cum out of a drain, Nicole Kidman licking milk out of a dish, and Zendaya and her two boyfriends dorm room discussions of tennis. This is no longer porn, moving beyond its spectacle. This is something more removed. The contemporary sex scene isn't really even sex anymore. It's not even the empty bodies that porn produces. Rather, they are the visuals, what is supposed to be sex without any desire behind them. They are sex for the sake of risque, but even more, in this portrayal, sex cannot supersede the aesthetic desire with anything more meaningful. Last little chunk. This returns us to sex in the contemporary cinema. There are no bodies. There are symbols of bodies, there are aesthetics of sexuality, but there is no fucking. There's nothing erotic. There's no shortage of romantic subplots, no shortage of theoretical fucking, no shortage of the stench of horniness that has ran through the box office in the past 2 years, but there has been a shortage of pure, unadulterated eroticism. Characters not choose sex, the plot does. It isolates the sex in these films, relegating it to nothing more than a piece of shock value to generate other cut style think pieces, but fundamentally it is still out of touch with the basic erotics that make sex desirable. Read this as a formal complaint. There needs to be fucking, real fucking with bodies and real erotics. Symbolism will no longer suffice. I fear that we are watching the death of sex, and while it is perhaps crude and taboo to phrase it like that, it's the only term that couples love and pure unadulterated pleasure together. My greatest fear, however, is not that sex is dead, but rather we are too incapacitated to do anything but watch it die. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Emerson. Emerson's essay is in a 2 essays dispatch on sexuality in cinema. Get your own copy to read Anna's essay on Baby Girl in that dispatch. Yeah. All right.
Anybody else need to leave? My name is Christopher. I wrote Sparkle Dog, Dog of the Stars. I will not read much of this. I'm sure you are tired and ready to mingle. I'll say a couple quick things. I was a comic artist before I wrote fiction for a lot of years, and there's actually the comic that illustrates this isn't actually an illustration. I used to do exercises. I used to teach comics, and I did this one exercise, and one day I joined my students and did this in about 5 minutes, and it was just this ridiculous brainstorm about a character called Sparkle Dog, which everybody somehow just hates, no matter what medium it's shown in, but they keep making it. And then when I started writing fiction, I realized I could turn it into a story. So that's how that happened. Also, this is a fictional essay. It is a mix of fact and fiction. And when it was being reviewed by the MFA students, I went to Emerson. They said they believed all of it until they got to the part about how James Patterson wrote a book with Bill Clinton. That took them out of the story, which actually really happened. It was a New York Times bestseller, sadly. So I'll just read a couple paragraphs here. Just after the middle of the 20th century, the exploration of outer space began moving from novels, stories, films, and comics, our collective human imagination, into real life. The USSR was the first to make big moves. In 1957, they successfully launched a small satellite called Sputnik 1 into orbit around Earth, and its steady signal could be heard by anyone with a shortwave radio receiver. A month later, the Soviets successfully launched a street dog named Laika into orbit aboard a 13-foot tall capsule called Sputnik 2. And while Laika the dog died within hours, likely due to overheating in the capsule, the launch was considered a major step towards human spaceflight. Just 4 years later, in 1961, the USSR finally sent cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into low Earth orbit, making him the first human ever to escape Earth's atmosphere. Later that very year, NASA's Project Mercury sent Alan Shepard more than 100 miles skyward. Just 2 years after that feat, US President John F. Kennedy made the bold declaration that the United States would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, a prophecy that was fulfilled by the Apollo program within only a few months to spare. It was in that same year, 1963, that an unknown author, going by the name C.K. Casper, published his first and only short story in the pulp fiction magazine Spicy Tales of Space. The story was titled simply Moon Family, and while it was an otherwise forgettable science fiction story about a family of circus performers living on a moon colony in the future, the unmistakable standout character from the story was the family's show-stealing, limelight-seeking pet Sparkle Dog. Sparkle Dog, a small white dog with perky ears and a curled tail, did space tricks in the low gravity of the moon, performing flips and rolls, balancing inflated balls on his nose, catching a baton in midair, or bounding over high walls. Anyway, thank you all for being here, and thank you to
Thanks so much. Cool. Well, everyone, I know this has been a very long night, so I think we can end on a bit of levity. I'm an undergrad here. Sorry. Oh, okay. Almost done. I've known about House for a very long time, and I'm so happy that Hengzhi has actually, turned this into a real magazine. It's like really, really incredible and difficult to sort of get this to happen. I run another magazine on campus, and it's just like the amount of work it takes is incredible. And the fact that he's done it is, I'm really, really happy. I'm reading a piece that has sort of been in work for maybe even years, if you want to say. It is about Edward Said, but it is about Edward Said's fountain pens. So this comes from many different sources. One of them is an interview I did last year with someone here, and we somehow got on the topic of fountain pens. And the second thing he said was, who likes fountain pens a lot? Edward Said. So, what do we make of this? And that's sort of what my essay is about. I'm going to start with a quote from Dickens. Dinner over, we produced a bundle of pens, a copious supply of ink, and a goodly show of paper, and writing and blotting paper. For there was something very comfortable in having plenty of stationery. In Places of Mind, Timothy Brennan's biography of the famed literary critic and public intellectual Edward Said, Brennan makes a sticking point of Said's taste for Mont Blanc pens and blue-bonded stationery. He repeats some permutation of Said's apparent infatuation with fountain pens, his, quote, expensive fountain pens, or, quote, in fountain pen on expensive blue paper, no fewer than 5 times. In fact, to Brennan, Said's legacy can only be considered in terms of his fountain pen as some sort of sordid disclaimer to future reception studies academics. Quote, but how long can an aura last? For an author who wrote with a fountain pen, ... Maybe Brennan is making a broader point about aura in the Benjamin sense. How long can any 20th century writer last, really, given that they all wrote with fountain pens? Of that detail, a long time apparently. The New York Times somehow illuminates that Said's favorite Mont Blanc model was the Diplomat, better known as the 149, in the Middling Review, despite the fact that the only diplomat that Brennan mentions in his book is Le Monde Diplomatique. The International Socialist Review mentions in their eulogy, Said's fountain pen reminded one that Edward was very much an intellectual in the 19th century edition of a Zola or a Victor Hugo, a frog eater. The Nation luxuriates in their eulogy over the sensuous motion of how Said would unscrew the cap of his fountain pen in the same stroke as describing his charm of the literati ladies of New York. To be clear, there is undeniable affection and true warmth in these tributes for the great man, but the overall effect is not altogether flattering.
The memorials remind me of one professor's words for a well-admired Black Harvard minister, spoken in reminiscence under a looming gilt portrait. He was a bit of an Anglophile. He liked his Victorian silver quite a lot. Another later section, so you guys should read the full essay, but archaic or poetic, to note that an intellectual is really into fountain pens in our era is to commit character assassination of the gravest order. It is to hurl all the worst insults of the academic seminar, indulgent, bourgeois, reactionary, ahistorical. The pen brings into focus the act of writing that is usually concealed as a matter of respectability. Text transmitted on a copy sheet or a string of Unicode glyphs is brought before equal eyes at the sight of the printing press. A complete book gives no hint of the writing that has occurred. The printed text can be infinitely contextless and reproducible, with the name of the author as just another line. The relation between the writer as a product of the text and the writer as an ideological marker that is a signifier and the signified. The resulting myth of the intellectual is a strong one that is impervious to attempts ad nauseum, Milton and his scribes, Dickinson and her scraps, Bound and his calligraphy at revelation. Instead, these tales only reinforce the border space linkages of the sign because their scope is not the moment of writing itself. To name the fountain pen thus is to break the myth of the intellectual. It is to reveal the link between writing and text, and in that process open their material world. Said's favorite fountain pen brand, the Hamburg-based Mont Blanc, releases limited edition pens in various series. Writer's Edition, Patron of the Arts, Muses, etc. In 2009, the inaugural pen of the new Great Characters collection was released in honor of Mahatma Gandhi. In lieu of visuals, alongside a pamphlet of quotations, a revealing semiotic reading is supplied by Mont Blanc. The 18-karat solid white gold barrel and cap, brushed in a horizontal linen pattern, reflects the exquisite texture of Indian shot silk. A golden wire, entwined by hand around the middle of each limited edition, evokes the roughly wound yarns on the spindle with which Gandhi spun every day for half an hour, regardless of where or whom he was talking to. The clip was set with a fever opal representing the orange color that is part of the Indian flag, whose cut is reminiscent of a spinning wheel, an object of great symbolic value to Gandhi. The 18-karat two-tone gold nib, engraved with a portrait of Gandhi walking with a stick during his salt march. One can almost rewrite the marketing copy of a 17,000 euro fountain pen into a lurid modern political condemnation. He spins yarn with an opal spindle and silver thread, ... He says women must be subservient and chaste, ... His fountain pen is made of pure gold. While no Paul Damon, Gandhi is reified in the pen as a pastiche of comic intellectual villainy, the class traitor champagne socialist, for me but not for thee. One cannot write with a fountain pen unless one has the means to purchase the pen and ink, but to do so is consider one's relationality to the fountain pen trade, which is to consider the circulation of the world. To write with a fountain pen in America is to consign to its industrial might, while doing so in India is to buy into colonizers' tools. To know the brand of Edward Said's pens, Mont Blanc, Dunhill, Cartier, is to invoke not just their semiotic meanings, but the vulgar and most indicting sign of all, price. It is not heresy to note that the intellectual likes nice things, but to say that the nice thing is the moment of writing itself shatters myth. There is no image there at all. So this is painting a pretty dark portrait, but if you guys feel like reading this magazine, which I highly recommend, sort of what saves this piece is Said actually, he actually did an interview with a small magazine called The Pennant, which is published yearly by the pen collectors of America. They usually publish articles like Prototype or Parker 61, More Lady Schaefer, Uncatalogued. But in summer 2002, the year before Said's death, after he had written his memoir, Out of Place, he decided to actually give a very rare interview to The Pennant. And if you guys want to read about what he says sort of in this interview, I'd highly recommend you guys read this issue. So, yeah. Thank you, Frank.
Hello. This is a poem I wrote after I had a dream about my brother. Brother was shrunken down. Sheep folds, and we seem to be expecting the first of the moon piercing. Faded bright thing, faded bright thing. But until then, we settle for the land awash in fearful blue. I have affection for clamps. Lady down the street always kept lemon drops, linden trees in her driveway. The local kids picked off the signs and came to her door. In the radio play I listened to tonight from the 30s, I close my eyes toward a cinnamon bear growling at a crazy quilt dragon in search of the silver star to go on top of the tree. How quaint to eclipse myself by anything far from reality. The turkey darks and lights go on a rampage. As my throat seizes from the dream, peonies grow more languorous. Sunsets no longer look familiar, though they happen every day. The character in the neighborhood seeks me, opening but allowed to be put away, waiting to be goaded by the sunspot, a retina blanching, but instead just blinks deliriously, rubbing its ribs against the gate, paint peeling. I love that. Okay. In the dream, I meet brother in the street. I try to put my, I don't know, what to do. I guess that's right.
There's a red light. You draw now.
Yeah, so in the dream, I meet brother in the street. I try to put my arms around him, but he makes his chest concave. He only allows his arms to grip on top of mine. There was no chest to chest. And when we arrived home, my roommate had his family over, too many people, and my brother shrunk down and cowered under the metal rungs of the IKEA kitchen shelf in the corner. Loud, travertine in the kitchen floor. How we had a quiet, heavy-set television that we never turned on. How brother lay stone dead on the couch as mother made borscht to feed his blood. Lozenges on the tongue, striations across your hands, and the ache set deep in the lung. I hope you are okay, brother, but I understand if you can only be angry.
Alex. We'll end the readings with a short poem.
Yeah.
I'll join the chorus of people congratulating and thank you and thanking Hengzhi. Very honored and excited to join the issue and very excited to read. Another vessel as the earth. There is no lake here, just the ocean. Doff my head to the crowd. The church swoons like sound. I don't know the church. I don't know a thorny bramble. The noise did find a way. I've never met the mountain. I haven't read the almanac. The year has stilled today. I am a tree too hollow to cut. The axe is still today. I take the time to make no use. I used to time and take. I stand on the tile of a temple and still at the shore of the bay. There is no lake here, just the ocean. There is no ocean, just the lake.
Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, all the readers. The party just starting. We have all the wine and the champagne and beautiful cheese boards. And we have physical copies available. It's selling out very fast. Thank you, everyone, for buying, for purchasing. There is a second, we're ordering a second print run that's going to arrive early next week. So you can order and come by Wednesday to pick it up if in case it's not out. But we're preparing for the second issue already. I want everyone to mingle, talk to each other, of course. And if any ideas, pitch to us, pitch to me through email. If you know me, text me, talk to me right now. Debate the writers about their ideas and their takes. Thank you so much for caring. I hope it's going to be a great night and it's going to rejuvenate everyone. Literature, culture is not dead. I hope you come out of this, go back to your home tonight and read before you sleep. Thank you. Thank you so much.